So today, a lot of what goes on in K-12 has a big effect on the post-secondary of our state colleges and universities. And to talk with us today on that issue is Ron Hughes from Cal State Bakersfield, who is a member of the network board of directors representing the post-secondary education community. And I've known Ron for probably most of the time I've been in education, so probably for about 25 years now.
Yes, yep.
And a lot of our interest and stuff is Ron teaches biology, but he's also has done the science methods class in the Cal State Bakersfield teacher credentialing program. And that's sort of how I came across him and was real active and an advocate toward environmental science and outdoor education. So to begin with, Ron, is I've been hearing from post-secondary college instructors for now last 5 to 10 years that the culture, the responsibilities, the expectations of the students that are enrolled in colleges today have, if you want to say, deteriorated, that they are not as independent and they expect to be more handheld. So,
Yeah, to some degree, I'll agree with that. What I've noticed, that first of all, I've been teaching at the secondary level for about 27 years. I taught junior high science for 3 years here in California, so I have experience in that field. And I've been in the elementary, middle school, and secondary schools almost annually. I make sure that I interact with those students and teachers to kind of anticipate what sort of students I would get at the college level. And what I have, this is anecdotal, of course, but what I've noticed is that students, have been they have disabled themselves a little bit. I see a tendency for some students to want to be handheld. Even though I provide them with instructions and examples of how to, for example, gather scientific data, how to analyze the data statistically, and then how to report on their findings in a scientific format. I do see a greater percentage of students that simply, want to be told what to do rather than for them to have to learn through the experience, where I act more as a guide. And that's basically how I was trained and how I have taught for decades, is to be more of a guide rather than to be a didactic instructor. And this may be, it's hard to narrow down specifically what may be the causes, but for example, the introduction of the internet and the social media and students being able to gather information online, there's a tendency for them to try and find one answer for every one question, and that's not necessarily so in science. The other thing is, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, is they like to be handheld, even though I give them 2 or 3 examples of how to do their work. Oftentimes they'll come back and they'll want me to tell them the answer or to verify for them that their work is good, rather than for them to explore and to try and see how science operates.
as far as, and again, we've had that, but also with technology. And I know at the post-secondary, we're getting the big increase in online courses. And I know
Right.
at one time that you had, and again, not you alone, but that there is a substantial percentage of students who do not succeed in online courses due to some of both the environment and the technology.
Yeah.
And if you want
Yeah. It's again, it's that's a complex issue, but it's there. When you have say 30 students in a classroom. The reality of is we've always known that there's a diversity of learners in there. There are some that are very highly motivated. There are those that are self-motivated in terms of the direction, and there are those that require it. And I'm as an instructor, I'm not opposed to giving several examples to a student. So those students can get it with one example, but you have those students that need several examples. Right. And so part of what happens is that this is pretty common knowledge that there has been a march towards digitally based courses, right. Online courses, and much of this is driven by budgetary issues because an online course costs much less, right. And in many cases you can have more students. But if you tie into that a lab component, which is what a lot of schools, both in secondary schools and as well as post-secondary schools, what they'll do is have the lab component, which really requires the students to get together, work together in smaller right. groups, etc. And so that when you have students that normally perhaps do not function well in a large autonomous group such as an online lecture, right. etc., it oftentimes they struggle to keep up with those students that already have the independent skills, right. rather the skills to work independently right. and socially. So it really does behoove us to make sure that we don't lose those students that simply have different learning strategies right. to come in with
right.
us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And quickly before we take a break is we've got a handful of states, I know Alabama and Florida are two of them, that because of the expansion of online education has mandated that high school students' graduation requirement, at least one class, be in an online format. And your thoughts on that is that something that California needs to think about?
Well, I have to tell you, I don't have an opinion on that because okay. I think it really, we are in the United States, our K-12 education has as its foundation local control, right. and so I think what happens is the local school districts, right. I would venture to say, are in the best position to be able to decide what's right. what are in the best interest of the students that they have. That said, clearly students do need to be able to work in those environments because a larger percentage of the workforce out there, the jobs that we're basically trying to gear them up right, for, right. Are going to require them to be able to be digitally connected right, and right. to be able to utilize to the best of their skill those environments, and to be able to recognize where the pitfalls right. may be, because right. you don't simply embrace online simply because right. it's cheaper and, right. and everything else. You have to weigh out what your goals and objectives are, right. And then to make sure that that's there. But to answer your question, I think that that a good education also requires students to be well-versed in a right. digital environment, right. online environment.
Right, definitely. So we'll take a break, and then when we come back, we've had some discussions of the comparisons as far as the quality and rigor of our education, secondary and post-secondary on an international basis.